How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time. I recently picked up this cool book of illustrations for all of the national parks, and while I was going through it, I was inspired to build an arch. But not this arch. I understand why this is considered a national park, but why is this a national park? Anyway, I digress. The arch I'm going to be recreating is this one right here, Delicate Arch from Arches National Park in Utah. I started the build with this little 1:72 scale guy. He will be the size reference for this build. Delicate Arch is just over 60 feet tall, so if a 6-foot man is 1 inch tall in this scale, using all of my brain power, I was able to figure out that the arch needed to be 10 inches tall. So I measured out and cut up 2 planks of wood to be able to fit the arch lengthwise with a comfortable margin on either end. I then used some wood glue and some C-clamps to permanently stick these 2 bad boys together. Then I set the base aside, let that cure, and I moved on to the terrain base, which is made from foam. I measured a piece to the same dimensions as the wooden base, and then I took that aside and I cut it out twice. I'm going to be making this arch from foam scraps, so I ran over to my foam scrap bin and I grabbed a handful of foam scraps. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but all these foam scraps are from my train build from February. It will definitely take me a while to get through all of this. I actually have so many I needed to go buy a special bin to hold them because they were taking up too much space on the floor. I made a rough draft scrap stack arch to make sure I had the right height, and then I turned to the internet to find a good reference photo. I then unstacked the rough draft stack and began working on the second draft stack. Delicate Arch is not symmetrical. There's a thicker right side and a slight hourglass shape on the left, so I restacked the foam accordingly. This time around, I blocked out a better shape that would make it easier to carve with the hot wire. Once I had glued all of the pieces together with some foam-safe superglue, it was time to start carving. This was my first time trying to accurately portray a real-life rock formation and not just carve one from my imagination, and it was a lot of fun. Definitely could have done with a bit more accuracy on the finer details, but overall, I think I captured the general shape pretty well, and I'm happy with the result. Delicate Arch sits atop a large rock that has quite a bit of character itself. I used a combination of utility knife and hot wire to carve the shape of that into the terrain base. I also added a little extra material under the left side to give the arch a slight slant, and I smoothed out the rest of the base with a creme brulee torch. As always, be sure to ventilate well and use a respirator whenever you burn foam. I then used more of that foam-safe superglue to glue the arch into place, and I cleaned up my workstation. I patched up some of the larger unintentional gaps in the foam with some gap filler, and I glued the foam to the cured wooden base. Then it was time to coat the arch in a protective terrain paste. I started with perfect plaster. I added about a half cup to my mixing container, then I added Mod Podge and paint to give it some flex. White glue also works for that just fine. The paint is so that you can see where you've applied the plaster mix. I also added some water to dilute it to the consistency I was looking for. This time around, I added some very fine sand as well, just to give it a slight amount of texture. And then I smeared it all over the foam. I used a paintbrush and worked the paste into all of the cracks and crevices, and once that was completely covered, I set it aside to dry. Once it was dry, I took it outside and I gave it a darker coat with a spray-on primer, and then it was time to paint. I wanted to give the arch the classic golden look that it gets at sunset, so I painted on some directional lighting and shadows manually with the airbrush. In historical images, you can see that Delicate Arch used to have a twin that sat right next to it. They were known locally as the Delicate Twins. In 1961, McDonald's sued Arches National Park for copyright infringement. Arches lost the case, and one of the arches was promptly destroyed. I have visited Arches National Park a few times and have enjoyed the hike up to Delicate Arch for sunset. This golden light is how I best remember the arch from my time there. After all the airbrushing was done, I dry brushed a golden highlight onto all of the corners facing the sun to give it just a little more pop. After that, I also added a few washes to the deepest recesses, and that was the painting of the arch done. Next, it was time to paint the figures. This is supposed to be in the Wild Imaginary West, so I gave this little frontiersman a backpack with some antennas on it. I gave the man and his horse the same treatment as the arch, and I painted on some directional light in the same way with the airbrush. I added the light first to establish the values, then I painted over top with my other colors before painting over all of those, once again with a dusting of deep lavender for the shadows and some more gold on the front for the light. I know I'll get comments saying that I should have added a monster or a mech to this diorama to make it feel more interesting and in-universe, and I understand, but sometimes it's nice to have a chill evening in the Wild West with none of the noisy stuff. Just a man, his horse, and a beautiful Utah sunset. After gluing the horse and the man into their positions, I gave the man some reins and ran them to the horse's bridle. The very last thing to do was to paint the sides of the diorama with black 3.0, and I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much for sticking around till the very end. Here's a fun piece of channel trivia for you. I came up with the idea for the Wild Imaginary West while camping with my wife at Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park. I started writing a story. I've used these dioramas as concept art for that universe. If you are ever near the Black Canyon, I would highly suggest a visit. It's an inspiring place.